gas exchange test, model answers and commentary. So hopefully you've attempted some corrections using the Help Me video, and this is quite a tough test. Let's have a look. So we have got a graph showing pressure changes. So students always struggle with pressure change graphs, and this is about a fish with two cavities and a cycle, oh dear, and lots of marks available here. We previously suggested to get these marks, these 7 marks, there's 11 available. To hit 7 of them, you're going to have to actually give some of this information back to the examiner. You're going to have to talk about times and what's bigger than what and that sort of thing, and your own biological knowledge about how fish ventilation works. Okay, so if we draw a little fish here, so there's a fish, absolutely brilliant fish there. Okay, and with this we could identify different areas. So we've got a mouth there, and then inside the fish we've kind of got a mouth cavity in there, and then we've got that little flap that opens on the side of the fish, the operculum, opercular flap, and in there that's going to be the cavity behind that's going to be our opercular cavity there. So mouth cavity, opercular cavity, that's where the gills are in there, and water is going to flow in here and out of the gills. So that's a bit of our own biological knowledge that we know. The other thing that we know, we need to talk about volumes and pressures. So the fish is going to be opening and closing its mouth. It can make its mouth cavity increase in volume or decrease in volume by moving the floor of this cavity up or down, and also it can reduce the pressure and volumes in the opercular cavity, and water's going to flow over these gills. So let's start and go, well, what's happening at the start of this graph? So from here we're going to go from 0 to 0.3 seconds. What's actually happening to increase this pressure? So if you increase the pressure of something, you need to close and contract it. So what's going to happen is the mouth is going to close, and the floor of the buccal cavity, the mouth cavity, is going to increase. So let's just say that. So mouth closes, and then mouth cavity contracts. So there's 2 marks, and now we're saying that is going to raise this pressure. So this raises the pressure from the mouth cavity to where the opercular cavity is and where the gills are. So it raises pressure and forces water into this opercular cavity, or where the gills are. We'll say over the gills. Then what's going to happen next? Well, this opercular cavity is going to contract, and again this is going to increase the pressure and force water through the operculum and over the gills and then out through the operculum. So opercular cavity contracts, and then this again raises pressure, and it's going to force the water out through the operculum and forces water through operculum. Timings. So now we're moving on to kind of this kind of region of the graph. So we've got the pressure in the mouth cavity going down, and we need to sort of go, well, what's going on there? So we're going to explain how the pressure in the mouth goes down right under zero into negative pressure. So let's identify this time. So 0.3 to 0.5 seconds. What's happening here? Well, it's the reverse of what happened before to make it go up. So we're going to have the mouth opening and the cavity, the volume of the cavity increasing. So mouth opens, floor of mouth cavity lowers, or you could say the mouth cavity expands. What's happening to water? Well, now water is going to enter this mouth, ready for the next cycle. So water enters the mouth. Why? Because the pressure has gone down due to decrease in pressure. And now let's just try and explain what's going on at this end. So from 0.5 to 0.6 seconds. Why is this line here, the opercular cavity, pressure going down? If the pressure of anything is going down, it must be because it's expanding. So opercular cavity expands this time. And now, if the volume is increasing, pressure's going down, then water's now going to flow into this cavity. So lower pressure causes water to flow over the gills. So hopefully you've got up to 7 of those marks in there somewhere. You could watch a video of the fish and the cavities to help with that. So pretty tough start to a test that. For how long during this ventilation cycle is water flowing over the gills? That's a crazy question. So pretty tough. We're looking for anywhere where the pressure in the mouth is greater than the pressure where the gills are in the opercular cavity. So water will only flow if pressure is higher somewhere than somewhere else. And so we go, where is pressure higher in the mouth than the opercular cavity? Well, we've got kind of there, and it's higher over there. Okay, so pressure is higher there, and also pressure is higher there. So all of this and all of that. So that's about 0.4, and that's just under 0.1. So any answer in the region of kind of about 0.5 seconds, but technically, if you do it really precisely, that's the sort of range that we're looking for. Why? Because the pressure in the mouth is greater than the pressure in the opercular cavity. So water only moves when the pressure is higher in one place than another place. That'll work when we move on to the heart and thinking about why blood flows from one place to another. That's going to be exactly the same, and you're going to get more of these graphs. Pretty tough question though. Hopefully this question is slightly better. You recognise this sort of kind of you've done a dissection. You can see the filaments there, and you can see gill lamellae there, and then you've looked at these, and you've done previous exam questions with almost this identical diagramming. So we've got water flowing that way, and we've got blood flowing the other way. So we've definitely got a countercurrent flow. Draw a curve on the graph to show the changes in the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood across the gill lamellae. So hopefully you have looked at questions that look at this countercurrent flow, and it's kind of a version of this graph that we're drawing now. You've got the countercurrent, arrows going different ways, but you notice that the water line is always above the blood line, and that's why you're getting diffusion all across this gill lamellae, or all across the gill plate. So our line is actually going to be kind of somewhere underneath this, and that's the mark. It's worth noting here that this will be going in opposite directions. We could possibly, because this is distance across the lamella, you might have drawn a graph that looked kind of the line going that way. You can technically say that if you started your distance at the, it depends which end of the gill lamella you're talking about as a starting position. So possibly it's gone up like that. Either way, the advantage to the fish of blood and water flowing in those opposite directions, we get diffusion of oxygen from the water into the blood at every single point along this gill lamella. So the black line on my graph here is always above the red line, right across this distance. There is a reason why they put this graph, almost directly under there to represent that. So we get concentration gradient, as that concentration is always higher than that one. Or we get diffusion maintained across the entire gill lamella, or gill filament, or gill plate. They'll get the idea there. So 2 marks, one really saying this gradient is maintained, or we always get diffusion, or equilibrium is never reached. And the second mark is across the entire gill. Hopefully we are now in a bit more familiar territory, how a person breathes in. So there's a person, there's muscles attached to these ribs, and there's a muscle across the bottom of the thorax as well. So we just need to explain what's contracting and what's kind of moving. And we're kind of going to go intercostal muscles, these ones between the ribs. These are going to contract. The rib cage is going to move upwards and outwards. The diaphragm is going to contract. It's going to move from this kind of domed shape to a flatter shape. And that's going to increase the volume, decrease the pressure, and air is going to go in. So that's just what we need to say. So 3 marks there. So I'm going to talk about intercostal muscles, that'll give me a mark. I'm going to talk about the diaphragm, that's going to be a mark, and then the volumes and pressures, and that'll be the last mark. So contraction of intercostal muscles, and we're going to say that moves the ribs up and out. So there's our first mark, talking about the muscles. We need to mention the muscles, and what do muscles do? We need to say that they contract. Now we can talk about the diaphragm. So again, contraction of diaphragm, that's how it's spelled. Contraction of diaphragm, which is a muscle. And what does that do? That flattens the diaphragm. So that's our second mark. And now we just need to say, well, how does the breath actually go in? Well, we've got an increase in volume, and the other side of that coin is a decrease in pressure. And so air will go in. B, we've got some more equations and all sorts of stuff going on here. To some things that you don't recognise, but this is these are part of the skills of AO2 and AO3, showing that you can take your information that you know and adapt it to a new situation. So pulmonary ventilation gives you a little equation there. It tells you what the breathing rate is and tells you what the tidal volume is. So even though we might not have met these before, it's telling us everything about them that we need to know. And here we've got an athlete resting and after exercise. Trends that we can see. We can see breathing rate has gone up, so 3 times, and then the pulmonary ventilation, that's gone up by lots and lots. The first question is calculate the tidal volume. So tidal volume, and it gives us the equation there. And so we are just rearranging this equation, and it's going to be, when we've rearranged it, it's going to be pulmonary ventilation divided by the breathing rate. So it's going to be pulmonary ventilation divided by the breathing rate. Because on this equation, we're going to divide both sides by the breathing rate to rearrange that. So we're going to get tidal volume over there, and that's going to be pulmonary ventilation, and then we put this down here, breathing rate. And when we do that, 7,500 divided by 15, that's going to be 7,500 divided by 15, and that's going to give us 500 cm cubed. Calculate the percentage increase in pulmonary ventilation. As described in the Help Me video, percentage increase is the increase divided by the starting value times by 100, and that works for any percentage change. What's the change? Divided by what did you start with, times by 100, and we're going to be fine there. So what's the increase? It's gone from 7,500 to 135,000. So what's the difference there? So it's going to be 135,000, take away that number there. What's our start value? So always, what did we start with? And let's times 100. And when you get a mark for coming up with that, and then another mark for hammering that into your calculation properly. So that would go in there. I can't bother to write it all out again. And 1,700 is your answer. It's not got a unit because it's just a percentage, so percent possibly there. Part C, we've got a table of percentage gases, and you're breathing in air and breathing out air, so inhaled and exhaled. We're looking at the differences here, so we are using up some oxygen. That sounds sensible, so we're using up 4.5 there, and CO2 we are producing that, and that's about 4 there. Nitrogen appears to go down by 3. Okay, so these top two gases probably cancel each other out, and the equations would support that. Nitrogen seems to go down. Water vapor seems to go up, and other gases appear to stay more or less the same. So we need to use this information in the table to explain why that goes down by about 3. Well, can we explain it by this CO2 going up? Well, no, because that's to do with this oxygen, so I'm going to ignore those. Other gases, well, those are about the same, so we can't really use that. So what we're left with is water vapor. So water vapor goes up by roughly the same amount as the nitrogen goes down. So that's our likely explanation there. So this is due to the increase in percentage of water vapor in the exhaled air. And that sounds a reasonable suggestion there. Then we're finally on to a nice missing word question, so we're on hopefully much better territory here. Single-celled organisms such as, well, our example is the amoeba, but you can suggest any other single-celled organism there. So I'm going to write amoeba because that's the one that we have talked about. Can exchange all the gases they need by diffusion. So we've got an amoeba there, and this distance is so small that diffusion across the membrane is suffice there. However, as organisms become larger, gas exchange becomes more of a problem. It's because there is a decrease in their surface area to volume ratio. That's a key phrase that you should have been using at school and again at A level. So surface area to volume ratio. The earthworms are small enough not to need a specialised organ for gas exchange, but adapted by having they're trying to trick you into saying ventilation system or lung system here, but you've done your revision and you know that they've just got a circulatory system, and you have dissected a worm and you've seen this. So a circulatory system. And in this circulatory system, what's circulating? They've got some sort of blood or pigment or hemoglobin in there. I'm just going to put blood there, but you could say pigment or hemoglobin. So hemoglobin, which has a high affinity for oxygen. More about that later. Large active organisms overcome the problems by having a specialised gas exchange organ, such as, well, with us it's going to be lungs. With our fish, in the previous question, well, that would be gills. So either of those will do there. In fact, that says lungs in humans, gills in fish. There we are. Okay, the moral of that is actually read this full sentence. And then, if you'd have made that error like I just did there, then a checking of this and still having some gaps would sort that out. So always check your work, folks. Well done.